learning at the Excellence Centre about the issues that we come across when asylum seekers and refugees come to our office. And of course today we're here to raise awareness around what those issues are and also to seek the commitment of organisations to make sure that LGBT asylum seekers and refugees are supported around their needs. We've got a great list of speakers today as well, who I will get to introduce themselves and to speak about the work, the great work that is being delivered in Wales by those organisations that are here. And we also have some members of our asylum seekers group who will be here until the end of the event. There will be some stories that you're going to hear, and of course you'll be able to speak to them because they will be here throughout the event. So if I could welcome the Minister Jane Hutt, Leader of the House at the Welsh Government, and thank you very much for agreeing to coming here today. Thank you.
Really pleased to be with you today. I'm here today as Minister with responsibility for equalities to launch the LGBT Excellence Centre's Asylum Seekers, Refugee Support Group and Resources, and I'm really glad you've chosen to launch this here in the Senedd, in the heart of Welsh democracy, and with the support of the Welsh Government, the whole Welsh Government behind you. I think also just for us to reflect, not just in terms of the legislation, which we are obviously now trying to implement. Legislation's okay as long as you implement it. We fight hard to secure it. But Wales has a proud history of providing refuge to people fleeing persecution, and refugees and migrants from many countries over the centuries have been welcomed by people in Wales. Now I'm very glad to see that Lindsay Whittle is here, one of our Assembly members. I can't see any others with us, but I know Assembly members as well as the Welsh Government are very pleased to be here to express support. And you know, I've mentioned legislation and the powers that we have here in Wales. Although immigration law isn't a devolved function, we are responsible in Wales as a Welsh Government, and then with our partners in local government and the health service, we're responsible for the provision of services such as education and healthcare to migrants once they arrive in Wales, and it's a responsibility that we take seriously. The fact that immigration decisions are made by the UK Government doesn't change our desire to build a Wales where refugees and asylum seekers are treated with respect and dignity at all times. So that is what we are committed to deliver, and that's what we have to be held to account for. And I am proud, and we are proud here today, that Wales is a country that does recognise and celebrate diversity. It does enable people to feel valued members of society in their own right. And of course there are challenges, there's problems that people experience and you experience that we have to overcome. There are barriers, discrimination, and we were debating earlier this week the complexity and the appalling nature of hate crime, and we are now developing a framework to tackle that across the whole of the Welsh Government. But I believe very strongly that in Wales we do have this commitment to respect and recognition and celebrating diversity, and we must make that a reality, particularly for someone from a different culture or country faced with images and stories from the media, which we have little control over, although we can admonish and confront the media for what they do. Asylum seekers and refugees living in Wales are dependent on our services, on our Welsh public services. The government and attitudes of Welsh people do make a difference, and we have to show leadership and stand up for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees in this context. And of course, the Welsh Government is committed to ensuring that every citizen of Wales has the opportunity to contribute to social and economic life, to become part of community, economy, society, and that we have to do by promoting equality of opportunity and community cohesion. And I think it is about how do we enable people to feel valued members of society in their own right, and when they're not, and when there are barriers, when there are issues and problems, that we immediately step in and confront in support and standing up for people who experience this unacceptable attitude and treatment. But I think we would all agree here today that Wales, it's a small country, the country that prides itself in its rich mix of cultures and traditions, and it does make Wales a more diverse society with strong communities and strong allegiances and loyalties and support. So we should enable this to happen, and I think by doing this work, I think it's excellent that we're here together, and we'll hear from many in terms of your contributions. But we have a programme for government. It does confirm our commitment to social justice and equality of opportunity. In fact, equality is a main theme, with a chapter dedicated to standing up for equality, but you can't just have a chapter on it. It has to be mainstreamed throughout the whole of the programme of government. We are clear we want delivery at the heart of everything we do, and continue good work that's delivered so far in Wales. It's always best to work on and to spread the good practice, the good experience, the good delivery. Now, the important thing coming forward is our new Strategic Equality Plan, which will be published in April. Many of you will be aware of the emerging equality objectives that have come forward as a result of consultation. And from these equality objectives and Strategic Equality Plan, people will be left in no doubt about what the Welsh Government is doing and is committed to doing, progressing about eliminating discrimination, advancing equality and fostering good relations. And those objectives will help us to promote equality and to tackle discrimination and prejudice, to build a fairer and more tolerant society in Wales. And particularly in securing equality in the provision of public services, so that those services do meet the needs of women, men, disabled people, older people, black, Asian, ethnic minority people, gay, lesbian, bisexual people, transgender people, and those with different religious beliefs. I mean, that is the way in which we will be tested, quite likely, in terms of those specific duties that we have under the Equality Act, where all the legislation has been consolidated, and we are determined to implement that legislation here in Wales. I've mentioned our commitment to tackle hate crime in Wales. Incidents of hate crime are shocking and unacceptable, and of course range from name-calling, physical harassment and even death. And the committee report we debated on Wednesday was specifically focusing on hate crime for disabled people experience, but the framework that we're developing is for action across the Welsh Government to tackle hate crime in all of its forms. And that's going to provide accountability across government portfolios, and it will include tangible and challenging outcomes which can be achieved during the framework's lifetime. But it's going to be very important to me that you support me. The LGBT Excellence Centre actually does play its part in developing the framework of action across the protected characteristics. And this is something where we need to look at current practice, we need to develop innovative ways forward, and we'll be linking with stakeholders, many of you here today, to take the work forward. So projects led by LGBT Excellence Centre will be crucial to highlight the many issues faced by LGBT asylum seekers and refugees. And we look for innovative and creative ways to resolve these issues, working not just with asylum seekers, but of course with the organisations set up and established to support them. And if we're bringing many of these issues together, and the organisations that are responsible, such as the UK Border Agency, we need to ensure that asylum seekers and refugees are recognised and are supported, and they have strong advocates working on their behalf. And I think that's where agencies can stand up and show that they're there to be the strong advocates. So I think just finally from me, Welsh Government is committed that equality and fairness has to be at the heart of everything we do. Sometimes communities can be misunderstood, people develop stereotyped views of these which are different from themselves, and that can break down, that can be a breakdown in communication within and between communities. Unfortunately, discrimination still exists, from homophobic bullying in our schools to unacceptable incidents of hate crime. Too many lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people face prejudice because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We must take action and challenge and change attitudes and challenge discrimination wherever it occurs. So over the coming months and years, we'll continue to work with partners to reduce the incidence of domestic and sexual violence, reduce homophobic, transphobic, disability-related and religiously motivated bullying and hate crime. And although progress has been made, it has been made towards lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender equality, our understanding of issues facing these groups has deepened and widened, but we need to continue to work to improve services, to raise understanding, to provide opportunities. So again, for me as your minister today, whatever background you come from, whatever your sexual orientation, whether you're transgender or not, we believe that you should have the same opportunities as everyone else. And I know that the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender Excellence Centre will continue its work to make sure this becomes a reality here in Wales. So again, diolch yn fawr am y gwahoddiad. I'm really pleased to be here today and to thank you for your invitation and glad to be part of this successful launch event. Diolch yn fawr.
I think the Excellence Centre has a strong commitment to obviously the LGBT agenda in Wales, and we're certainly grateful to the Welsh Government for the commitment to this agenda as well, but also for having supported the development of this project. I wanted to give you just a very short story around how this project began. And it was just one person that walked through our door seeking support with an application for asylum, disclosing that they were a gay man and that they had issues in terms of how their case was being handled. They weren't believed to be a gay man. Secondly, we had another individual who got in touch with us because they wanted to volunteer. They were another asylum seeker. They disclosed to be a gay man, and of course without an opportunity for employment, and they wanted to be productive and feel that they contributed to this society. The third person that got in touch with us was another asylum seeker, another gay man, who wanted to be able to meet other people because he wasn't able, up until that point, he hadn't met anyone else who was gay. For me, that highlighted the need for looking at this work, at this gap that we have in understanding that sometimes asylum seekers, refugees, migrant workers, people from other countries, not only face the barriers of integrating into a society using a different language to what they would have learned in their country, but also finding the support they need in a way that is accessible for them, and also trying to overcome the barriers that they might be facing within their own community or with the people that they are living. So the Excellence Centre looked at getting these three people to meet, and gladly in 6 months that group has gone from 3 to 12. So it certainly demonstrated that there is a need for this work. The variety of the issues that we deal with, the diversity that everyone brings when they turn up, walk through the door, turn up for the meetings, is unbelievable, and every day we're learning something different about what people face and what can change the situation. So I will tell you another little bit of this story later on, but I would like to welcome here on stage Aled Edwards, OB, a great friend who is here amongst his many hats today as the chair of the Strategic Migration Partnership.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a joy to be here with you today. I'll just bring a quick little funny story. I have, as some of you may know, a protected characteristic. I'm a clergyman. And a couple of weeks ago I had to cope with the moral dilemma of what I should wear for chapel in the morning when I preached, thinking of going straight to the game afterwards. And it was quite a challenge because I had to wear my rugby shirt, but I didn't really know how chapel people will take to me wearing my Welsh rugby shirt. I was given all sorts of advice. One of them was that I should wear a cassock, one of those big, heavy black things. And then somebody was kind enough to say, as if I was stupid, well, if you do wear a cassock, wear your rugby shirt underneath it. A woman friend, perhaps that's indicative, a woman friend said, just wear your rugby shirt the wrong way round, because there's a white bit underneath your collar. So that was quite good. But the final email for me was the clincher, when a good friend rang me up and said, what you really need to do is just to go as you are and preach about being accepted for who you are. I thought that was a powerful, powerful message. I serve today a number of communities as the chair of the Welsh Strategic Migration Partnership. Sometimes we have robust conversations within that partnership. As you can imagine, somebody who's the chair of the Space People in Action at times has had a rough relationship with borders and immigration. At times we've had robust conversations with the Welsh Government, and we've challenged each other and we've developed a relationship with each other. And let's be honest, the past few days, with certain crises in mind that hit the news, it's not been easy. And people have been quick to say something about our sector, to say something about the work that we do. Perhaps today is a fantastic opportunity for us to say that here in Wales we hold ourselves to account for the way in which we do things. And we are not ashamed of who we are, and we are not ashamed of what we do. I have had the experience and the great joy and the privilege of meeting a diversity of asylum seekers and refugees from every part of the world with very, very difficult stories. I've had Christians who have been persecuted by Muslims. I've come across Muslims who have been persecuted by Christians. I've come across politicians who have been courageous within their context to say that things are wrong. I've had journalists who've paid a huge price for telling the truth. And it's been very obvious to me in some of the people that I have met, particularly if I may say so in prison, that the issue for them was that they were gay, and that their cultures were not kind to them. And the way in which we sought to help and to process their case here was not kind either. And it is good for us on a day like this, from a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of convictions and responsibilities, to stay in this space, in this place when we work together. We will uphold human dignity and human value. And we will be proud of what we've achieved here in Wales. And we will be more proud still of what is to come. Perhaps on a week like this, we think of crises and difficulties, and the challenges within our sector that are very real. But let's not define ourselves by those challenges. Let's rise above them and say boldly that we have been better than this, and we can even be better still. And one of the things that we can do here in Wales is to honour the LGBT community alongside other communities, and to say that here in this culture, in this place, we value each other and respect each other and listen to each other. I celebrate what the Excellence Project has done. We celebrate what we're about to achieve. But let's make no mistake of it. The price that some of the LGBT community pay worldwide, and indeed here for who they are, is still an issue for us. Thank you, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Aled. Thank you to the Welsh Strategic Migration Partnership as well for the support of the project, and also for helping us financially with the translation of our resource into quite a few languages actually. I think that your words, Aled, are really encouraging, and they certainly highlight also the need to look at some of the issues that some of our asylum seekers are facing around religion, for example, around dealing with their community, thinking back of their experience in their country. And certainly in the work that we do, we come across a number of people that are experiencing issues in terms of being able to maintain their spirituality, their religion, their belief, whilst also dealing with their sexual orientation and gender identity. People that are afraid to disclose their sexual orientation and gender identity because they feel that they might be ostracized by their church, by their mosque, on to live their religious life. I think it's very interesting as well the work that you do with the Interfaith Council, and looking at how different religions are coming together to deal with issues that might sometimes create difficulties. And certainly within the group, we got a very diverse number of people that come from different backgrounds, from different religious backgrounds as well. And it's very good to see how everyone is working together and supporting each other. So that is just to highlight that there is already that integration within our group. I wanted to also mention something around statistics, because yesterday the ITV Wales came for an interview and they were asking for numbers. So how many people are we talking about? How many people are you supporting? So, well, we got 12 members in our group, which I think is a group of very brave individuals that are sticking their neck above the parapet for the first time. But it's very difficult to quantify how many people are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender in the UK, regardless of whether those people are also asylum seekers or refugees. When we hear of statistics about 10% of the population, well, if we think about 6,000 refugees and asylum seekers in Wales, that makes 600. So we got 12 people in our group and another many people that we have to still reach out to. But how do we do that? That is our challenge, because we are a small organization, but sometimes we have a very loud voice because of the partners that are here today, because of the organizations that we work with, and because of the message that everyone carries. So I'd like to welcome to stage another of the partners. So Vicky Chitiga is here from the Welsh Refugee Council, who has supported the development of this project. So,
morning to you all, and thank you for allowing us to be here with you all to celebrate the launch of the LGBT Asylum Seekers group. As advocates for asylum seekers and refugees, we welcome this momentous event, which we feel is long overdue in the sector, particularly in Wales. I'll briefly outline some of the problems that asylum seekers and refugees face with the experience that we've worked with them, and how we find it difficult to assist when they're in dire need. When asylum seekers arrive in the UK and they claim asylum within a reasonable time, they are entitled to NAS support, which is support provided by the UKPA. Now, this is offered on a no-choice basis, which means that they're often dispersed to different areas within the UK, where accommodation is available, and they're often asked to share accommodation in either a shared property or, in some very unfortunate cases, to share a room. Accommodation may be supplied with people of different backgrounds, age groups, religions, beliefs, and indeed sexual orientation. Service users are advised at this point, when they come to us, to accept this property and to deal with any other issues as they arise. We do advise them that you can request for relocation, but it needs to be evidenced. And that proves to be a very difficult and traumatic process for most of our clients who may have a different sexual orientation. what we find is often there's conflict within the property. There's aggression from other service users, particularly if they find out that they are of a different nature. In other very unfortunate circumstances, there may actually be violence towards the other parties. And often there's a nature of ganging up towards the individual who's different from all of us. And quite unfortunately, we request service users or the person who's being perpetrated to provide as much evidence as he or she can before we can submit a relocation request, which is what is required by the service providers, the accommodation providers. In our view, it's a very traumatic process. It's a very difficult process to ask someone to be further traumatized, to be further put through a lot, before we can actually say, well, maybe it is time for us to do something, or maybe it is time to give them a break. In other very unfortunate cases, the individual who's in the minority and who's ganged up on by the other service users, who are also asylum seekers, quite unfortunately, manifest their stress or their anxiety through different ways. Other people become aggressive. Other people don't communicate very well. Other people tend to be aggressive towards not only their fellow house users, but also towards service providers, which means that we end up either banning them, further limiting their access to any sort of advice or any other sort of assistance. And in some other very unfortunate cases, individuals remain silent. They choose not to speak out, and they allow themselves to be intimidated, discriminated further, because they have no other option and they have no one else to turn to. Now, obviously, this is not criticism in the process for other service providers or for the accommodation providers. Obviously, great efforts have been made to match people who are similar according to age, country of origin, and religion. But obviously, people are different. We're all different in our beliefs. And certainly, we're all different in how we approach different issues, particularly of this nature. It's therefore essential to point out that maybe we can do it differently. Maybe the barrier in terms of asking people going through this process, where they're living with partners or they're living with individuals in the household who don't accept them, maybe it's time for us to sit again together and decide how else can we do it. Should the barrier for evidence be so high? Should the individual be traumatized again whilst they're dealing with their case? People flee their country for different reasons. Particularly when they arrive, it's not always easy to disclose why they fled the country. Particularly if in that country it's illegal. So often what we find is most applicants don't disclose at point of arrival or don't disclose when they initially claim asylum, which leads to probably the second most difficult barrier that they face, which is credibility. The case is dealt with very quickly, and a matter of months, sometimes 6 months, 3 months minimum, and the case becomes appeal rights exhausted. At this point, they're evicted from the property, support is discontinued, and they're now destitute. Now, given the background that I think Federico and a few other people mentioned, they do not have a community that accepts them from where they've come from, and they often don't have a community that's accepted them, either with the people they met within a short period. So destitute asylum seekers who are of a different nature, who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, experience a lot more difficulty than most people, most asylum seekers would. Because other people can depend on communities, other people can depend on community groups or churches. But what we find in most cases, destitution means dire straits and no one to turn to at all, except maybe living on the streets and handouts from different groups. On the more positive side, once asylum seekers are granted some leave to remain, which may be refugee status, they're given 28 days to vacate from the property. Now, there's a good working relationship between service providers that's been struck. This often means that service users or the new refugee is allowed to first secure their NI numbers and to first secure their status documents to register with the different service providers before they're made destitute. But what we also realize is that when you're a single applicant, you don't have priority to social housing. When you've arrived in the country with the barrier to the language, the culture, or you've never independently lived in the UK, it's very difficult to secure adequate accommodation in a very short period. So once again, the problem begins for a refugee. Perhaps there's more that could be done as different service providers here. Perhaps there's additional support that we can provide by working closely with this group to see how we can fill in that wide gap. The conflict often remains when a refugee is granted leave to remain or refugee status, whether to remain in the community or whether to relocate, particularly if they've had a trauma or they've been stigmatized by the community that they're already living in the UK. So once again, they have to relocate to another area and try once again to rebuild their lives. We as the Refugee Council have undertaken to work closely with this group. We've undertaken to ensure that there's no discrimination. We've undertaken to ensure that we engage all service providers and all different partners to try and fill in that gap. And most of all, we want to work very closely with community groups to try and remove the stigma, to try and remove what could be very dire straits for people who become destitute. There are some issues we cannot change, as it was mentioned earlier before, particularly when a decision is negative. But there are other efforts we could make to make life a little bit better by closing social working. I'll just leave you with a quotation from Martin Luther King, who's quite an inspiration to me. I think he said once, in the end, we remember the words of not our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I think in these particular circumstances, it's always to remember which side we want to stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And again, thank you to the Welsh Refugee Council for the support for this project. We certainly have learned as well from the Welsh Refugee Council some of the issues that, again, asylum seekers and refugees can face when trying to put across their needs, trying to explain what they're facing in a different language, and sometimes having to disclose information to a translator, maybe from their own country, with sometimes views that might not be always in line with that individual, trying to explain things to a caseworker who maybe doesn't have the right knowledge or understanding to probe with questions that are open enough for people to disclose that information. So with the Welsh Refugee Council, we're very glad to have resources now that will be distributed to every asylum seeker when they arrive in Wales, so that they have information regardless of whether they are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, cisgendered or heterosexual. They have resources that they can look at in their own language to actually know that there is support, that there is organizations out there that they can speak to, so that they don't have to feel afraid to go and pick up a leaflet in front of everyone, fearing that other people will find out that dirty little secret that you're not allowed to disclose to anyone in your country. So it is very empowering for us to know that we've got strong partners that will support us in this journey. But of course, the successes that we are celebrating here today as well is that three of our members have actually achieved refugee status. So early victories for us, but certainly a long journey ahead. So to talk about some of the issues that people face once they become refugees, I would like to welcome Shan here from the Displaced People into Action. Thank you very much.
I'm very pleased to be here today to to offer DPIA support to the LGBT Asylum Seekers and Refugees group and to the work of the Excellence Centre in Wales. I particularly commend their aim to raise awareness of the difficulties that LGBT asylum seekers and refugees face during the asylum process. And as many of us are aware, unfortunately, there are many barriers that LGBT people face who suffer persecution, particularly in talking about their experiences and in fact even navigating the asylum process. And as a result, we see many vulnerable people in grave need of protection that don't get the protection they deserve. For example, if I refer you to the Stonewall report, which provides stark evidence that treatment of one group of asylum seekers is less fair than the others, simply on the grounds of their sexual orientation. DPIA provides refugee awareness training, and we have refugee speakers groups, and we would like to work with the Centre to ensure that during our training, we make people aware that in many countries, LGBT people face execution, torture, rape and murder from people in their own communities or from their own government. The support group is of particular importance as it not only provides direct support to asylum seekers and refugees, but also because it provides an opportunity for organisations such as ourselves to work and network with the group and to ensure that our services are known and are accessible. So the key to all this is meaningful partnership work, and we aim to support the integration of refugees and asylum seekers in Wales. But in doing so, we recognise that there is much diversity within the group of people we aim to support. And I therefore think it is really important for all service providers, whether they're providing services for a particular group of people or not, to recognise that everyone is different. And as such, we all have different needs and need very different degree of support in order for equality of opportunity to become an actual reality. Unlike most asylum seekers and refugees, LGBT asylum seekers and refugees may not receive the same support from their own ethnic communities, and they may also encounter prejudice and discrimination. As a result, they are often more isolated. So the support group is therefore so important, as they are able to provide information and knowledge about services on offer, particularly around integration services, as you said, when we people get refugee status. So services such as ours, employment and education are vital, and it is important that people are aware of these services and are able to access them. So as an organisation, we are really grateful that we can now refer people who come to us to the Excellence Centre and vice versa. And we know that through the Excellence Centre, they now have the expertise and to provide that additional peer support, and we can work together to support people to integrate. I would personally like to reflect on an issue of confidentiality and talk about a personal experience of mine. Whilst I'm a paid employee of DPIA, I also volunteered for asylum justice as I have a legal background. I once supported a client to submit a fresh claim for asylum on the basis of his sexual orientation. A few weeks later, I was in the DPIA office and he came to access our employment and education advice service. The office, as usual, was extremely busy, and there were members of different communities present and members of his own community. I immediately witnessed his reaction. He looked terrified that I would disclose that he was gay. I was aware that I would need to contact him at a later date, so I said a passing general hello to everyone and left the room. When I later rang him, I spoke to him and explained that as a volunteer of asylum justice, I was bound by confidentiality, and no one within DPIA would know that I was representing him, and I would certainly never disclose any personal information about him. He was so relieved. He then went on to explain that in his country, if he had disclosed that information to anyone, they would have been legally obliged to have reported him to the authorities. He then said, which is something that has stayed with me always, he had witnessed instances of mothers and fathers reporting their own children to their authorities. So this leads me to a key point of confidentiality, and that is that LGBT asylum seekers and refugees may face discrimination from other asylum seekers and refugees, and this can make the process of integration even more difficult. Not only does it make confidentiality issues more important, but it also raises questions about how we raise understanding amongst refugees and asylum seekers in Wales, to ensure that they are aware that discrimination against LGBT people is unacceptable in the UK. This is no mean feat. Often, refugees and asylum seekers seekers come from countries where sexual identity or gender is not understood, and even to talk about such things is illegal. One of the ways that we're endeavouring to improve understanding, to enable the process of integration for everyone, is to provide quality training to refugees and asylum seekers. In March, Race Equality First is delivering a quality training to our refugee and asylum seekers advocacy group in Swansea. The forum has also agreed to support this launch event in Swansea, and we welcome the interaction with the Excellence Centre. Also, recently, speaking to a forum member, she'd been invited to an LGBT church group to talk about refugee and asylum issues. She's a Muslim, and she said that it was a great opportunity to discuss things openly, frankly, and ask each other some very difficult questions. It was in an honest and safe and friendly environment, and it certainly did break down many barriers. She said after the talk they had all learned so much about each other. Finally, I want to take the opportunity to remember those people who have been returned to countries where the fear of persecution is constant and very real. And it is my hope that the awareness-raising work of the Excellence Centre will result in improvements in the asylum process, so that LGBT asylum seekers in need of protection are afforded the protection they need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shan. And once again, I think the Excellence Centre is very, very pleased to be working with displaced people into action, and certainly looking at what we need to do to support people after being granted right to stay in Wales or in the UK, so that they are fully integrated into our society. The Excellence Centre LGBT Asylum Seekers and Refugees Support Group offers people an opportunity not just to come along and meet other individuals, but also be able to learn from each other and be able to also think about what are those things that will make a difference to themselves as a group, but also to the wider asylum seekers and refugees community in the UK. With the funding from the Welsh Government, we were able already to connect with other LGBT support groups. So the UK Gay and Lesbian Immigration Group, we went up to London to meet with them. We also met with a group called Iman, which is a support group for LGBT people who are Muslim. We will be going up to Manchester to meet with the Lesbian Immigration Support Group, which obviously supports lesbians and bisexual women in the Manchester area. So it will be a very interesting journey for us to see the experiences in terms of people that is very difficult for us to engage with. And obviously that breadth of information, it is about bringing it back into Wales, looking at what is out there already that we can learn from, and making sure that